Time to light the match for the Burning Truth with Casey Hendrickson.
No, I will not be Adobe'd. Sorry, this is one of those things that the radio audience is not privy to. Morgan and I are trying to work something out here because, again, in the background, we have been working on a whole bunch of new stuff for all of you. And there's going to be some dramatic changes coming to the website, btmedia.news, also the live stream, social media presence, all of that stuff, because Morgan has been just an absolute angel on this since she's joined the team. But the live stream kind of sometimes hears us bantering back and forth about it. And somebody was like, you're going to end up getting Adobe'd. I know. The whole point is to avoid Adobe software as much as possible because Adobe, well, they don't like their customers very much, and it's irritating. Good tools, high-quality stuff. Nobody is denying that Adobe makes good software. The problem is the way that they treat their customers, and their monetary strategy is terrible. So, yeah, no, I'm not going to be doing the Adobe thing. Because there's some people here more just like, just get Adobe. Yeah, I don't have like $50,000 a month to get all of the tools from Adobe that I need. And they don't allow the a la carte thing on a reasonable pricing scale. I wish they did. I truly do. But they don't. So we will continue to hunt things down. All right. This is an interesting story. Campaign poll shows AG candidates in statistical tie in Indiana. Now, what this is about Democrat Destiny Wells and incumbent Republican Attorney General Todd Rokita. And they're saying that it's a tie. Now, this is the Indiana Capital Chronicle. Holy smokes, I said it without saying the thing that I wanted to call them in my head, Morgan. It was going to be the Indiana Capital Chronicle, but I actually got through it like a professional. See, 2024 is treating me very, very nice. They are crap, though. Seriously, toilet paper, like digital toilet paper. When the 3 seashells comes out, the Indiana Capital Chronicle will be the template for how to wipe your backside. So, campaign poll shows AG candidates in a statistical tie. Okay. So, what does the Attorney General have going for him? Well, he's, for the most part, pretty awesome. What does Democrat challenger Destiny Wells have going for her? She's pretty. That's it. That's really it. Have you heard Destiny Wells say anything that is even remotely viral, important, noteworthy? How many news stories do we have? Morgan, you do the news. How many news stories do we have of Destiny Wells saying something very profound that everybody has to talk about? Not a lot. Not a lot. She's nice to look at, so that's going to get some votes. She's whamming, so that's going to get some votes. But ultimately, she really doesn't have anything other than the abortion issue because that's all they really have. And Todd Rokita is unabashedly pro-life. He's also a fighter, and that's one of the things that I think that people really like about him, even if you don't agree with every position that he has. And I don't. I like Todd a lot. I've known Todd for many years. We're not friends. We're not golf buddies, but I've known him for many, many years. He always stuck out for me because there was a story about him, and I covered it, I defended him, and I had no idea that he knew who I was. This is a long time ago. That man sent me a thank you note in the mail. You ever had anybody send a thank you note to you who is in public office, Morgan? Me either. And I have been doing this for what? I don't know, 12, 13, 14 years at the time. I'd never had a politician thank me for helping them or even just covering a story. Never had that before. Todd Rokita was the first one. At that point, I don't think I'd ever talked about the guy or talked to him. And it was just the weirdest thing. So it was one of those things that just kind of stuck out for me. And, Todd and I did an event here in the Mishawaka area a couple months back. And it's I like him. I like him a lot. And just as a human being, I like him. I disagree with him on a couple of things, particularly vaping. But, nonetheless, human beings are always going to have those disagreements. But I like him a lot. And I think that he's done a pretty darn good job as Attorney General, especially since he fights the fights that are necessary to fight when he can fight them. And most of the criticism of Todd Rokita comes from people who don't like the laws in Indiana or that he, as the top law enforcement official in the state, actually enforces those laws. So that seems to be the biggest issues with Todd Rokita. So this is why this is important, though. When you see a headline like campaign poll shows AG candidates in statistical tie, maybe the article is by Leslie Bonilla Muniz, M-U-N-I-Z. So I apologize, Leslie. I'm not trying to be a jerk, I promise. I'm just genuinely terrible with names. A campaign poll released Thursday shows Democrat Destiny Wells and incumbent Republican Todd Rokita in a statistical tie for Attorney General. Okay. Misleading opening sentence, accompanied with a misleading title, I should say, not tie. So when you hear or read campaign poll, you're like, well, they're in a campaign, so it's a poll about the campaign. No, that's actually not what it is. Wells earned 41% of the vote and Rokita brought in 44%, within the poll's 4% margin of error. Now, generally speaking, just so you know, when we're talking about polling anytime, you should have 3 or less percent margin of error. If you have more than 3% margin of error, your poll is dog crap. It is not a good poll. You do not trust anything with a 3.1 or above margin of error, ladies and gentlemen. You just don't, okay? That is a fact of life in this business. 3 points or less. That's when you can say this might be an accurate poll. This poll is saying that there's a 4% margin of error. That's not great. And because it has a 4% margin of error, the 3% difference between the two of them doesn't mean much. Because some of you are like, well, it's a 3% difference, so it's technically correct, right, Casey? That sentence isn't wrong per se. Okay, what was written here in the Indiana Capitol Chronicle is not technically incorrect. It's just that you should understand with polling, and most people don't understand polling, and you're not supposed to, by the way. It's designed that way. But in polling, if you have above 3% margin of error, you did not do a good poll, which is why you have the larger margin of error. You yourself realize there's a problem with your methodology and or your data. So you now boost your typical margin of error in order to give yourself some flexibility and say, see, we weren't that far off. But you never trust polls that are over 3% margin of error. It's just a general rule in this business. Lake Research Partners conducted the phone survey. Okay, that's a phone survey, Morgan. That means it doesn't mean anything either. Dang it. Son of a gun. Just like that. Now, again, some of you who have been listening for a long time, you will understand why I say that. For those of you who have never heard the show before or just started recently, if you're one of the new markets that the show is now syndicated in, you may not fully understand that. You need to get closer to elections to get more accurate polls. And the reason for that is conducting polls is really, really expensive. And when you have private firms that don't get any taxpayer money to conduct polls, they do tend to be more accurate because if they get the polls wrong, they go out of business. Other polling firms, the vast majority of them, do not fund their own polls entirely, at least. They get a lot of taxpayer money, or they have what's called seed money. So sometimes you'll see these partnerships with like the New York Times and Ipsos, and that's because the New York Times is bankrolling Ipsos because the New York Times, has a dog in the fight or what have you, and it gives them something to write about. So it's marketing for them is what it is. So you find oftentimes when you have those partnership polls, sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not. There's better partnerships than others, and some are bad and some are good. Again, I'm not denigrating all of them. But generally speaking, you want there to be a private polling firm that has to stand on their own merit and their own results, or else they make no money and they go out of business. One of those polling firms is Rasmussen. They're not the only one, but they're one. Rasmussen doesn't get taxpayer money, totally funded through private means. So if they don't do a good job, people don't want to spend money with them, and then Rasmussen goes out of business. So Rasmussen tends to be a little bit more accurate than the average polling firm. I don't know much about Lake Research Partners, okay? However, because polling is expensive, generally speaking, you don't get the best results until you get right around the election. Usually October is when that starts just going gangbusters. Sometimes in September. Now, they're spending money for a phone survey. That's good. The problem is that if it's a phone survey, we need some additional data. Is it landlines? Is it cell phones? Is it a combination of them? Because those polls are conducted very differently and they cost dramatically different amounts of money. It is cheaper to do a landline phone survey. When you do a landline phone survey, you tend to run into a certain age demographic that could be problematic for the poll's results. I'm not attacking anybody out there who still has a landline. I'm just pointing out there's only 2 of you left. So when you have a landline, and that's where you're getting your polling firm contacting, if they're not doing cell phones, and this article doesn't say that I can see anywhere, then you might have a problem with the data, which could be why the margin of error is larger than your average margin of error. So they conducted the survey from 600 likely general election voters between August 26th and September 2nd. Now, there's nothing wrong with a 600-person sample size. That's actually fairly common. Under 1,000 is fairly common. If you get over 1,000, it's a pretty robust poll. So don't poo-poo that if you're new to the polling game. 600 is actually a pretty good margin. Now, you start running into a couple of other things. 51% of likely voters were Republican, 36% were Democrats, and 7% were independents, which partner Daniel Goddard said was reflective of Indiana's deep red electorate. Maybe. Now, what they're trying to say here with this poll is that 51% of the respondents for the poll are Republican, and yet Rokita's only polling 44%, which means he's losing 7% of Republicans, while 36% of those who took the poll were Democrats, and Destiny Wells is getting 41%, which means she's gaining 5% above the registered Democrats who took the poll. So they're trying to tell you that the polling data in this Attorney General poll for the Hoosier State in Indiana shows that Destiny Wells is pulling Republicans away from Todd Rokita. And what kind of a suck Republican would you have to be if that was the case? And that she is easily picking up those numbers far beyond what Democrats are. The goal here is to show that she has broad appeal across party lines. There are simps in the Republican Party who will vote for somebody because they're pretty, I suppose, but I don't know if it's 7%. Just over half of the respondents were women, and nearly 90% were white. About 72% did not have a college degree. Okay, so what they're saying is this is a real competitive race. Now, I don't want to say that Destiny Wells isn't a capable candidate. She is. She just hasn't really done much yet to evoke a big response anywhere. So if there is a competitive race here, it is simply because of the negative attacks that the news media, like the Indiana Capital Chronicle, keep doing on the Attorney General, Todd Rokita. But there's one other factor here that I left out. Morgan is telling me that I got to tell you all of this because we're running over time again. Guess who paid for the poll? Remember, if you're a privately funded poll, you're more likely to be accurate. But that goes out the window under one circumstance. You know what that circumstance is, Morgan? Any idea? Oh, if a campaign pays you. Yeah. So the Lake Research Partners Group, which is based out of Washington, D.C., conducted the poll for Destiny Wells' campaign. It's an internal poll. You only release internal polls when they're good. You keep them all hidden when they're not. But generally, you pay for those internal polls to give you an idea of what you need to focus on as a campaign. You generally don't release them to the public. You know what this is? She's getting walloped, and it's bad. So they've released this poll, even though it's an internal poll. They've released it to try and generate some headlines. And that is exactly what the Indiana Capital Chronicle has done. And the average person wouldn't know any better. Todd Rokita knows better. Destiny Wells knows better. Political operatives know better. Casey Hendrickson knows better. Question is, will it fool you? Got more coming up. You're listening to The Burning Truth. All right, I think I know how we can fund our new media empire that we're building, Morgan. Did you know that you can buy a diamond making machine on Alibaba for $200,000? Can we crowdfund $200,000 from all of you folks, and we will send you a diamond if you chip in? I look, there are mined diamonds, and then of course there are now manufactured diamonds, and the manufactured diamonds are real diamonds. They're just they don't have the story, the history, the great epic tale of slavery and abuse and all of that stuff. So this is interesting. You can buy a diamond making machine for $200,000 on Alibaba, and I guess you can just pump out lab-grown diamonds. All right. I like lab-grown diamonds, for the record. They are diamonds. They're real diamonds. They're not cubics, okay? They're real diamonds. They are more affordable. So for the same price, you will get, as a mined diamond, you will get a higher quality diamond with better color and better clarity for the same price. And then if you care about that sort of thing, because some of you softies care about that, I guess, you have the whole humane thing, you're guaranteed that it didn't come from a mine with slaves and all of that. A lot of mined diamonds don't anymore, by the way. So jewelers have gotten really good at sourcing diamonds the right way and not supporting the blood diamond industry and all of that stuff. So it's less of an issue than people think that it is nowadays, but I'm just letting you know, you got 200,000 smackaroonies. You can go ahead and get yourself a machine that will actually make diamonds. And I don't know. I think we should go into that business. You imagine that, Morgan? If we get to 10,000 subs, we'll send you a diamond. That's actually not a bad idea. I might actually do that. We got more coming up. You're tuned in to The Burning Truth.
The Burning Truth with Casey Hendrickson.
I like how the Attorney General, who has weaponized the Department of Justice, is out there giving a press conference going, I decry these attacks on the Department of Justice, the unprecedented things that I have done that have never been done against a current or former president ever. I'm like really mad that you're calling me out on that. Like, this guy. You realize how close we were to that dude being on the Supreme Court? Like, for real. Like, that is... I mean... It's better that he's Attorney General than a Supreme Court Justice. But you still got to deal with the guy for just a little bit longer. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for hanging out with us. We do appreciate it. All right, we're halfway through the show. Morgan, what's the betting odds that I can actually stay on time? I only get a week's grace. So after that, John's like, nope, you got to get back on schedule. So we'll see. Sorry. I started the show by telling you I wasn't going to do that. Now, I have done more topics. I've been rapid firing through the topics, but I told you I wasn't going to bloviate, and I have been bloviating, so I apologize. I want to thank R&B Car Company, locations in South Bend, Warsaw, and Fort Wayne. Go to rbcarcompany.com. No joke. I was actually on their website perusing earlier. I'm looking at possibly upgrading next year. Not exactly sure what I'm going to do, though. So, I don't know. One of the vehicles I may actually go new. which I don't recommend anybody typically do. There's a couple of things that I would go new for, and I don't know. I'm trying to figure out if it's possible to swing it one way. So we'll see. I'll know more in January. So an Indiana Democratic candidate for governor. Yeah, there's one. Has released a plan to legalize the marijuana. Now, I'm not sure if I said this out loud. Morgan, did I say this out loud? Like she was going to do a full legalization push. Did I say that out loud on the show? No, I didn't. Okay, I wasn't sure. And the reason that I'm not surprised by this, but Morgan says I didn't tell you that, so I believe her. The reason that I'm not surprised by this is it's an over 90% of Hoosiers support legalization. Over 90%. Like, it's going to happen, okay? I'm sorry if you disagree with that, but the reality is it's going to happen. And Indiana is more purple than any Republican really wants to admit. Now, you've definitely heard me say that, right, Morgan? Yeah, more than once. You all have heard me say that for over, I don't know, how long I've been here, 12 or 13 years? So this is not something that the Republican Party should take lightly, okay? Michigan was a winnable election, but Republicans screwed it up by not addressing the marijuana issue. And now you have Gretchen Whitmer and the Fourth Reich over there. So there's a real connection there. I told you what was going to happen in Michigan. I lived in Michigan at the time. I told you exactly what was going to happen. And by the way, I didn't just tell you. I called the Republican Party. I told numerous county party chairs. I talked with people in the state party. And I said, you don't do this, you're going to lose. And they didn't listen to me. For those of you who don't know, what happened in Michigan is the organization NORML, which goes around the country. They have legislation that they introduced. This is the organization most responsible for the marijuana legalization effort in the United States, especially legislatively. They've been around forever. I've been interviewing them my entire radio career. But they have a bill that they introduce. And Michigan would allow, okay, based on that whole process passing and the voters saying, yes, they wanted to legalize, but there's a provision that would allow, on the ballot initiative, that would allow the Republican Party, who were in the majority at the time, to change the legislation that the group NORML had introduced on the ballot initiatives. And they could tweak the legalization to be what they wanted. NORML has always maintained that they want local municipalities to opt out of selling marijuana, that this is something that could still be tweaked by the legislature of the state. They've always maintained that, okay? That's always been their plan, is to let the local politicians do what's best for the state. And the Republican Party had an opportunity to do that, but there was a deadline. And the Republican Party chose not to exercise their option to alter the bill to address some of the concerns that a lot of their politicians had in the state of Michigan. And as a result, the law passed as it was written. And Republicans lost the election. It really is that simple. People who wanted to legalize marijuana came out, they voted in droves. It was a close enough state that the motivated parties who were interested in legalization came out in enough numbers to flip the state to Gretchen Whitmer. Yes, the Flint issue was a part of it, but it wasn't that big of a deal, statewide, okay? So this is something that Republicans need to be very, very cognizant of. Indiana has a lot of Republicans, but a lot of those Republicans are not. It's the middle of the week. Did I say that too fast, Morgan? Indiana has a lot of Republicans, but a lot of those Republicans are not. Make sense? Okay. Now, when you factor in conservatives among the Republicans, if you are a conservative, a real one, not a make-believe, part-time, faux conservative, but if you're a real conservative, I got news for you. You are like single digits in this state. There are not that many of us. Not that many at all. A lot of people pretending to be us, but there aren't that many of us. And You might like Mike Braun. Mike Braun's not one of the big C's, all right? Might be a nice guy, might even be very capable of being a really good governor, all right? I'm not denigrating Mike Braun in any way, but he's not a conservative. He is a Republican. I think he's probably better than the Holcomb wing, but, there's some wiggle room for improvement with Mike Braun. And there's a lot of people who feel the same way. There's a lot of Republicans out there who don't like Mike Braun's policies and his record in Washington, D.C. So there is a chance that Jennifer McCormick, who has nothing else but abortion to run on, could gain some traction with this thing. She's run, let's be perfectly honest, and I know that there's even people in Indianapolis hearing this, and I know that people in Jennifer McCormick's inner circles are listening to this show. Jennifer McCormick has not run a good campaign. Jennifer McCormick was very trusted by Democrats to begin with. Then she picked her attorney general running mate, and Terry Gooden wasn't the best pick. For Democrats, they didn't like him either. She picked him because she thought that he might appeal across the aisle. He might be the moderate pick. And she's running as a moderate in a state that, frankly, is mostly moderate. But she's doing it in a way that is inefficient and not effective. I understand the logic behind the way that she's running, and it's actually not flawed logic. Indiana is a fairly moderate state. It is a moderate right state. And if you can corner the moderate right vote in the state of Indiana, you've got a good chance. The problem is that Mike Braun is moderate right too. And so if you're moderate right but have an R next to your name, you're more likely to be trusted by the moderate right than you are if you have a D next to your name, particularly if the only thing that you're really talking about is abortion, because Indiana does have a ton of pro-life people. And that's where McCormick is going to have a big problem. So how does she make up that gap? She's trying to be in the center. Mike Braun's in the center. How does she do that? Well, she embraces something that we really can't get any other Republican who runs, for gubernatorial election. Braun has expressed, maybe. He's expressed some positives on medicinal. But she's got a plan to legalize it. And this could motivate a lot of people to come out and vote. And because of this, depending on how she campaigns on it, she could get close. She really could. A lot of people, even who are pro-business Republicans, would look at this and say, hey, marijuana is going to bring a lot of money to Indiana. And if there's something that Republicans and I'm talking about like party establishment types, and not just politicians, but people who are party establishment types. Anybody who thinks that Eric Holcomb is anything but awful, all of those people in the Republican Party are just, hey, we'll make money at the expense of Hoosiers, and we'll make money no matter what. As long as we're making money, we're good. Well, pot will make a lot of money in Indiana. It'll make a lot of money for farmers in Indiana. It'll make a lot of money for retail establishments in Indiana. Pot will make a lot of money. A lot of money. There's a reason I go over the annual profits in Illinois, right next door, and Michigan, right next door. Now I will do Ohio as well. We're surrounded. And a majority of the state, a large majority, not a small majority, supports legalization. Over 90%. Now, it's high 80s that supports recreational legalization. Almost every Hoosier wants medicinal legalization, okay? Now, of course, the other problem with that is a lot of people are like, well, once you do that, then it's just the next step. Yes, you're right. It is. I got news for you. Pot's going to be legal in this country. That's just how it's going to happen. You can choose to die on your hill if you really want to. It's not a hill worth dying on, in my opinion. But this is just what's happening, okay? So you can either capitalize on it, steer it the way that you feel is best and most effective for your state and your citizens, Or you can just let it happen and let it be totally out of your control, and potentially there'll be pitfalls and mistakes as a result of that and potentially lose elections. And that could be a real issue for you. So Jennifer McCormick, the Democrat candidate for governor of Indiana, unveiled a detailed plan on legalizing marijuana in the state. In August, Ohio became the third state bordering Indiana to legalize marijuana possession. McCormick's plan calls for allowing Hoosiers to use marijuana for medicinal use, as well as a pathway towards full adult use legalization. Guess what? Over 90% of Hoosiers agree with her. Braun hasn't taken this position. Hoosiers have made it clear they support adult use cannabis and are frustrated by Indiana's outdated prohibition laws, McCormick said. This might be the first thing she's ever actually spoken that I agree with. And I'm talking about going all the way back to her being head of education in the state. Our plan takes a common sense approach by first introducing a well-regulated medical marijuana industry, allowing us to address potential regulatory challenges and ensure a smooth transition to well-regulated and legal adult use cannabis. She's got some details here. I'm going to go over those details in just a second. And again, Republicans at the state level, Republican Party chairs, you need to be sounding the alarms here. This potential for being a game changer is very, very real. You cannot ignore this. We got more coming up. You're tuned into The Burning Truth. And good afternoon. Thank you for tuning into The Burning Truth. I'm your host, Casey Hendrickson, live on Rumble. Go to rumble.com/Casey the host. Make sure you hit that thumbs up button. There was a lot of you watching earlier. Didn't get a lot of thumbs ups. A lot of people watch and they don't hit that. That is really important for the algorithm. If you could do that, that would mean a lot to me. And if you're not subscribed, please do subscribe. Download the free Rumble app, whether it's on your TV, your smartphone, or what have you. And make sure you get those notifications when we go live. So Jennifer McCormick, running for governor of Indiana, she finally is like, look, we're losing this thing. Abortion's not getting us enough. So what we have to do is we've got to come up with something else. What's the other thing that my opponent, Republican Mike Braun, won't do that is really popular in the state? Marijuana legalization. So she announced her plan to legalize cannabis in Indiana. So this is a description that she released. It would establish the Indiana Cannabis Commission. The plan will create the Indiana Cannabis Commission, which will be responsible for overseeing the legal cannabis industry, including regulation, licensing, and ensuring compliance with safety standards. This independent body will help Indiana develop a well-regulated cannabis market. She's really beating the drum on that well-regulated thing. Protecting Hoosiers and ensuring transparency as the state transitions to full legalization. So the whole point is to not just do it all at once, but to just kind of roll it out in stages, okay? It would also establish the medical marijuana industry. The plan calls for the immediate creation of a regulated medical marijuana industry, providing Hoosiers with access to cannabis for medical purposes. This step will allow Indiana to address potential challenges and learn from the experiences of other states before moving to full adult use, look, I'm not going to lie to you guys. Like, this sounds fairly reasonable. You have a lot of data out there. You can look at what, states did that were good, what states did that were bad, some of the changes the states have had to make to correct some of those mistakes. And you can just kind of learn from that and just start off without making those mistakes. Transition to adult use cannabis. While the initial focus is on medical marijuana, the plan outlines a clear pathway towards full adult use legalization. This phased approach will mitigate system challenges and ensure Indiana's cannabis market is well regulated and effective. It would then regulate hemp-derived THC. The plan also addresses the issue of unregulated hemp-derived THC products currently flooding Indiana's gas stations and smoke shops. By regulating these substances, the state will protect consumers and ensure that cannabis products meet safety standards. Now, she says it could generate $172 million annually in tax revenue for Indiana. That is well within the ballpark. If you start taking a look at the data in surrounding states, she's onto something. More coming up.
Podcasts by Federated Media.